Welcome back to the Spector Creative channel. I'm your host, Toy Guru Neitlich, and if you've been following this channel, you know that I make videos about a lot of things I'm passionate about. Big one I'm passionate about is toys. That's a big reason that I collect toys and have worked in the toy industry for over 25 years. I'm also really passionate about comic books in all forms, although some heroes better than others. Animation. I love cartoons. I love cartoons on Saturday morning. I love cartoons in the middle of the night. One thing that I'm also passionate about that I don't really talk about that much on this channel are maps. And no, I don't mean like, maps trying to find your way around a new town. I kind of mean more like maps in an artistic sense. Hey, the more dragons and sea monsters on a map, the cooler it is. It's a big reason that in my office, while I have a lot of action figures, I also have a lot of maps. Mostly fantasy maps and mostly maps from movies and, different pop culture events and, things like that. I also have explorer maps because I'm really big into history and I love those intrepid people who would march into places unknown. And even kind of funny maps that are meant to be whimsical and not to be taken too seriously. So is it any wonder with my love for toys, comic books, maps, and animation that when it came to the Masters of the Universe Classic series, when we wanted to come up with something as a subscription bonus for people as an incentive, we said, hey, let's make a map. Because, it's cool and it's something you can hang on your wall. And again, I like maps. What can I say? But it made a lot of sense. Plus, it could be done relatively cheaply because it only had to be printed, not tooled. So, that's much easier. And we actually went up doing a map every year. We started really digging deep, going from Eternia to Etheria, to doing Preternia, the time of King Grayskull, to Subternia, the land underneath Eternia that's going on, even the Horde Empire, which would be the outer space around Eternia, and then finally a map of the inside of Castle Grayskull. So how did we do these maps? It obviously took a lot of research, and it's not like we had a giant book or map room at Mattel that we could do the research in. As much as I wish we had a map room, well, at least we had the internet. And on the internet were both fan creations as well as photos of old maps from the 80s that were created for Planet Eternia, which was the first map we did, and at the time, the only one we thought we were doing. And of course, also in Filmation, there were a lot of great screen grabs where you saw both the planet from outer space, so you could figure out the land masses, as well as some actual screen grabs from episodes where they're looking at maps and in old books. So essentially, we looked at all of this. We even looked at fan creations and different ways fans had reinterpreted Eternia, even comparing it to planet Earth, and used all of that as a resource. And we were very lucky that there were a lot of resources. We were even luckier that Rudy Abrero was available to draw it. We knew we wanted a talented MOTUC artist and someone associated with the brand to take a crack at the map, and Rudy is perhaps best known, as far as Masters of the Universe, for drawing the paint, or actually not drawing, but painting the painting that was used on the Castle Grayskull box art, with Skeletor there guarding Castle Grayskull. More on that later in a different video. But he also did many of the other pieces of art for different launch items like Battle Cat there, and he even did some art on his own that was inspired by some early renditions of the castle, of how Mark Taylor had envisioned it before it became Castle Grayskull. All right, so with Rudy on board and knowing that we had a longtime MOTUC collaborator, felt very comfortable that a map of Eternia was going to be relatively easy to do, and Rudy knocked it out of the park. Next up, the following year, well, it made sense if we did Eternia, we were going to do Etheria, the planet that She-Ra grows up on, which in the lore of MOTUC Classics was deep in the dimension of Despondos, kind of the shining jewel in this otherwise evil dimension. And again, lucky for us, there was lots and lots of reference material from the vintage line, including actual maps that were produced. So again, it made it so much easier to make the maps when we had existing maps that we got to copy. And once again, Rudy was tapped to do the map, and once again, he knocked it out of the park. Although since I don't know if we announced he was doing the maps, because there was a lot of feedback, I remember, especially about the Etheria map. People thinking that it was drawn very amateur-y. I was like, it was drawn by Rudy, the same person who drew the previous map, the same one who did the Castle Grayskull art. Wouldn't go with anyone else. I think maybe it was also just because there weren't as many things on Etheria. Etheria was a little bit smaller, and we sent reference to him so he had on hand all of the items from Filmation, as well as some of the Mattel toys that took place on Etheria, because we wanted to make sure we paid homage to as much from both the content and the toy line as possible, looking at ways to combine the different fright zones, have, Light Hope and all of that. So he used both the old maps and he used reference material we sent him. And first he would create a black and white drawing, which he would send us for approval. And once we did that, we would fill in all the names. First, I would just do it with pen and send it back to him, and then he would do it as part of the art style, adding it in, and then he would color it. And that was how Etheria was done. Again, there were less things on Etheria than there were on Eternia. All right, so that actually brought us to our first challenge map, which was going to be the map of Preternia, which was the time of King Grayskull, thousands of years before He-Man. Started off hundreds of years, but then we updated it to thousands because it made more sense. And, the problem with this one is there was a lot less reference material, and I needed help. So basically I was begging and pleading with the art group, but unfortunately everyone was booked. So we really wound up...
I'll do it myself.
And grabbing the bull by the horns, I started with just a copy doc, and just started making a list of all of the locations that should be included on a Preternia map. And once I had all of these locations, at least, in mind, and I had a good list, well, I took pencil to paper and I drew the map myself, because since we had no reference to go off of as far as a cohesive map, we had to basically go off of what's spoken in the 2000X series and how it's described, have certain things swap, like the Sea of Rakash and the Desert of Rakash. So, with my pencil drawing in hand, sent that off to Rudy, as well as a ton of material as reference. So knowing we wanted things like dinosaurs and Granomir and Cyclone's back piece, which was going to be inspiration for the city his people were from, as well as what Castle Grayskull looked like back in Preternia. Then we knew there were things like giants and more dinosaurs. Again, combining all the elements from both the vintage line and the 2000X series that mentioned Preternia. We knew the three towers were there. So it was kind of a way of combining lots of different reference material from both toys, vintage mini-comics, and the 2000X series. And once again, Rudy outdid himself and came up with a black and white illustration, which was then given zone names and more on map labels, if you will, that we would send it back to him with some notes, and then he would color it. And once again, beautiful, beautiful map, no tooling involved, and we could just print it and send it, which, again, was great because we had a very, very, very tiny budget for this line. And while I wish we could have sent the maps rolled, unfortunately folded was the way it had to go. All right, so next up was the map of Subternia. So again, we had to combine a lot of different elements because, again, there was no existing map. And once again, I took pencil to paper and doodled out what the map would look like, showing all the different areas and connecting them with lava flows and energy flows from the Starseed, showing where Procrustes was and the hidden city of Hex, all that stuff. So with my rough pencil sketch in hand, basically we now had a sort of a set process where I would send my rough pencil sketch to Rudy along with a ton of reference material, and in this case we needed to pull reference material a lot from the 2000X series because they spent a lot of time in Subternia in different episodes. So we would try to get screen grabs, we actually got a lot of help from the audio-visual group at Mattel to sort of go through different episodes and do really clear screen grabs of some of the things found underground, like Serpos' temple, and the area where the Spalians and the Caligars live, and the gates to Castle Grayskull that are buried beneath there. So really just trying to give Rudy as much visual guide as possible for all the different ways one can access Subternia, what's inside Subternia, what things look like. So that way he could basically translate this into pieces on the map and details on the map that would harken back to the series and actually look like the Subternia that we saw on screen. And besides looking at the 2000X series, which obviously gave a lot of the creative direction for this map, there were also some things from the vintage line we wanted to get in there. One of the ones that I asked for was Battle Bones, and I wanted him to be posed like a dinosaur fossil, like all curled up. And I remember Rudy asking, what do you mean by that? So I found this image online and sent it to him. He's like, oh, okay, now I get it. So we'll just do Battle Bones like the way a dinosaur fossil looks. And then, of course, there was the mini-comic with the Hex insect people, which took place underground, so I thought that should definitely be something included. So sent him some images from the mini-comics, because again, anytime He-Man and his allies or Skeletor is going underground, that automatically became reference for Subternia. So we looked at every instance of this, and anytime a character did something underground. One of my favorites, and I was so glad we included, was the Rock Warriors book, which had one of my favorite He-Man paintings of all time on the front. So I made sure that we included the Rock Men or the Lava Men in there too, because I just love this painting. This was one of my favorite books as a kid, and it just always stuck with me, and I really wanted to get it visually included in Subternia. So once again, our process was pretty set at this point. Rudy would send the rough version to us. We'd review, and by we, I mean me. I keep saying we as if I had a team. And then we would add labels, and he would color it. And now we had the Subternia map. So pretty styling. All right, so our next year, we're kind of starting to run out of things to draw maps of. We've done inside, we've done outside, we've done back in time, we've done She-Ra's planet. The next logical thing seemed to do would be outer space, since there was definitely a lot of outer space involved in the Masters of the Universe brand. And while some of this centered around the new adventures, there was also other things like the Horde Empire. And I remember Rudy saying, well, what do you mean? Like, what does a map of outer space look like? So I went online and I Googled space maps, and I pulled some Star Wars maps and some Star Trek maps and showed him kind of how a fantasy star map could look visually, and use these as just kind of like template direction of how this would work, because he'd never drawn a star map before. He'd drawn land maps. And once again, I took pencil to paper and drew out what would be the Horde Empire map, noting that the Empire itself was kind of in shadow, was like a giant claw reaching out from Horde World. I thought that was like a really good visual to show sort of Horde, kind of creeping out there and taking over the galaxy, as well as showing different positions and ways, like sublight tunnels, Einstein-Rosen bridges between Earth and Eternia, to show kind of the connection where everything was located, and how there were shortcuts and there were black holes, and where Earth was located just outside the Horde Empire, as well as Eternia, and then doing an inset shot that was Eternia and her moons, so that we could get a nice, clear image and reference for that as well. And to do this, I had to, again, make a list of every planet I could find, and a lot of these came from the bios. If a planet was mentioned in the bios, then I added it to the list. And there were some other ones. There were things like Prison Star mentioned in the mini-comics, and essentially I would just go through every possible MOTUC reference I could find, and anytime a planet was named, it got on my list. And then I would write down sort of a brief description, mostly to make sure they all looked different from each other. And then Rudy still said he needed some visual reference, so I spent some time looking at some planetary fantasy artwork and sent him some images of different looking planets that I visually thought was cool. And then things like, for Prison Star, we knew that it needed to be kind of like a robotic planet. And there we go. Rudy gave us our black and white version, and he nailed it once again. With a couple small notations and fixes, we now had a color version, and we had our map of the Horde Empire. It's always amazing to see it go from my rough pencil drawing that I did at my desk to something as beautiful as this, that a real artist could do. It was definitely a thrill. All right, so another year. So now we are getting close to the end of my time on the brand. And now that we've done so many maps, thinking, okay, well, what do we do next? And honestly, logically, I keep saying we, but it's me. Castle Grayskull. And at this time I was working with Axel on the mini comics. And while it was great working with Rudy on the land maps and the space maps, Axel has a very different approach to MOTU in that he doesn't really need the reference material. It's all in his head already. And a lot of the original locations in Castle Grayskull that he created in the mini-comics, like the library that King He-Man is in with the giant floating astrolabe there, and his knowledge of vintage mini-comics, like the spirit of Castle Grayskull coming over the turret in the original 82 mini-comics, as well as things from the 2002 series, like Hero's Grave. Axel just knew to add these things, and he kind of drew it up himself, and then I made a few notes and sent it back, and I mean, he just knocked it out of the park with very little direction because he is so good at this, and he knows the brand so well. And he was also able to connect it with the Subternia map, showing how the energy flows from the starseed through the crystal chamber into the castle, as well as in an insert shot. So yeah, that kind of ended the maps. There were more maps planned. The next one was going to be Snake Mountain, which makes sense since we were following up Castle Grayskull with a Snake Mountain toy. But unfortunately, after I left Mattel, the new team was a little focused on some other brand issues and some other direction, and that map never happened. Nor did the map of the New Jersey Turnpike that I really wanted to see happen, because I knew subscribers would love that. All right, I hope you enjoyed this inside look at how we did the maps for Masters of the Universe Classics. Let me know any comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Topics, welcome. Send your topics. Thanks so much.